Hello, I'm Michael Embry, and welcome to our fourth and final program of Meet the Kentucky Book Fair authors. Now, the Kentucky Book Fair, if you haven't been watching the previous programs, will be November 15th and November 16th at the Frankfort Convention Center. Now, the first day, on Friday, runs from 9 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., and it's called Children's Day, and it's our third annual day for just focusing on children and children's authors and the like. Now on Saturday from 9 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. it's the 32nd Annual Kentucky Book Fair. And we have all kinds of authors there, history, novelists, some luminaries such as Sue Grafton, Rick Pitino, Wendell Berry, Bobby Ann Mason. It's going to be just a great day again with presentations, symposiums. We've been asked, it's wow, with all this going on, how much does it cost to get in? It's free, folks. The only thing you have to pay for will be the books. We hope you buy several because they make great Christmas presents and birthday presents. It's great to have a personalized book. So keep that in mind. And furthermore, the books you buy, proceeds go to benefit public libraries and school libraries and literacy programs. So we hope to see you there especially on Saturday from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Now today we have three more of our authors, and we have a kind of variety here. We have Ronald Van Stockum, Ann Gabhart, and Gwenda Bond, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll start with you, Mr. Van Stockum. Now what's the title of your book?
The title of the book is Coming to Kentucky. Heaven is a Kentucky of a place. I thought that by having Kentucky twice in the title, I might be invited to the book fair, and I was.
Okay, good thinking. Now this book came out this year, correct?
Yes, it did. It's a combination or a collection of a number of columns that I've written in the Shelbyville Sentinel News dealing with various subjects, military subjects, subjects about prominent Kentuckians and so on, and it follows my previous two books of columns. The first one I wrote was about Squire Boone and Nicholas Meriwether, two early pioneers in Kentucky, particularly active in Shelby County. And the last one then was remembrances of world wars, where I wrote about military conflicts in World War I and World War II. And this one is sort of a collection of the remainder of the columns.
Now, to give a little background, you're a retired, Marine Brigadier General?
Yes, I'm a 30-year professional Marine. Retired in 1967, and in 1970, my wife insisted that we move back to Kentucky, where she owned a historic farm called Allendale in Shelby County.
Now I understand this is you've written actually 4 books.
This is my 4th book. They've all been sold at the fair.
Okay, now lost my train of thought here for a second. Now you're originally from England, and you moved to Canada, and then you served all around the world, correct?
Yes, I was born in England. My father, Reginald Barham, was killed in the bloody Battle of the Somme on the 1st of July, 1916, when 20,000 British soldiers went over the top, or 100,000 went over the top, and 20,000 were killed. And that was a one-day toll. Mm-hmm. The Germans came out of their trenches after the artillery barrage had passed by and mowed down the British soldiers that were advancing. My wife subsequently brought me across to America and married a very fine Dutchman by the name of Van Stockum, and I've taken his name, and here I am.
Okay. Now you're kind of a late bloomer as being an author. Your first book was in 1995 or 96?
Yes, I was very much impressed about the history of Allendale Farm, which we occupied, which had been in my wife's family since 1795. And the more I learned about the farm, the more I thought there was a story to tell. And so I wrote it in my first book, which I called The Kentucky and the Bourbons, the story of Allendale Farm. The Bourbons doesn't refer to bourbon whiskey, but to the Bourbon family, which my wife was descended from.
Okay. I was wondering, how much has your military background impacted your writing?
It has, I suppose, in my Marine Corps career, it seemed that I was frequently called upon to write the citations for my fellow officers and men who had performed heroically in combat. And I started writing while I was in the Marine Corps. I wrote several columns for the Marine Corps Gazette, so I built upon those experiences, and in 2007, about six years ago, I offered to write a series of columns for the Shelbyville Sentinel News, and since then I've written 12 columns dealing with military matters based on my own experiences and based on my observations and research, and also about Kentuckians, about Shelby County, about my farm.
More books planned?
Pardon?
Do you have more books planned?
Oh yes, yes. I've got. I've written a manuscript already about the distinguished Charette family that that the Allen family of Allendale had married into, and it was a family of heroes of France, well known in France, and I have written that down. I don't know how it will sell in Kentucky, but it's something that I feel compelled to put between the covers of a book.
Okay. Well, Mr. Van Stockum, thanks for being here, and hope you do very well at the book fair, and I hope to see you again next year's fair as well with another book.
Thank you. I hope to see you next year too.
All righty. Our next guest is Ann Gabhart, and Ann, you have 2 books this time.
2 new books for the book fair.
And what are the titles?
Well, the one came out in July. It's called Small Town Girl, and it's actually a follow-up of my book that I had last year, Angel Sister. It's sort of set in at the beginning of World War II.
Okay.
It follows up my characters who were in Angel Sister, and those characters were during the Depression era, the 1930s. So it's the same characters, but it's a standalone story about how the characters are after they've gotten older. My other book is another Shaker book. It's set in my fictional Shaker village of Harmony Hill. That's sort of based on the Shaker village in Mercer County. I use the physical setting. I researched all the Shaker villages, but I use the physical setting at Pleasant Hill in Mercer County. And when my editor suggested I write a Shaker Christmas book, I said, well, I don't have any idea how the Shakers celebrated Christmas in the 1800s, but I did a little research and found out that they had a day called the Sacrifice Day, or a Day of Atonement, and on that day they had to forgive everybody that they had done them any wrong, or they had to ask forgiveness for anybody that had done any wrong, and you could never bring that up again. So it was sort of a day that you had a new beginning. So I was able to use that in my book, and because it has a theme of forgiveness in it.
Well, as an author, I mean, do you find that enjoyable to sit there and have to research and learn something new?
I enjoy research. When I was a kid in high school, I hated history class, but after I got out of high school and began writing my historical novels, I decided that history is much more fun when you get to read whatever you want to read about history. And so I enjoy history now, and I like it when I can find something interesting in the history books that sort of catches my interest, and I think, boy, that I might be able to drop my characters down into that time period.
Do you? A lot of people think of you as a Shaker writer, don't they?
I hope
Or is
not.
that fair?
I hope not. Actually, when I'd written the first Shaker book, and my publishing company then wanted me to write more Shaker books, and that was one of my hesitations because I didn't want to be tied just to writing Shaker books. I wanted to be able to branch out and write.
Well, that's
other
what I want
types
to
of
follow
books.
up on that. Now, what else have you written? I mean, the other is what, in a
The
sense?
other book is just a historical with a little romance in it. It's got some of the beginning of World War II in it, and most of my books have a little history, and some of them are just small town. The books that I call my Holly Hill books are just sort of a small town family story about problems that a family might have had during the 1960s.
Now, with the small town girl, you said that's kind of a follow-up of your Angel.
Angel Sister.
Angel.
It's the same characters.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up to this here now, or?
Actually, I will have a new book coming out next summer called Love Comes Home that will pick up the characters after World War II. So it'll be after when all the soldiers are coming home and the difference that in their lives from being in the war and the different things that have happened to the family during the war.
Well, is that, do you find that challenging or fun as well to sit there and to carry that, watch the characters grow?
Well, I think these characters, especially, I got close to the characters in Angel Sister because I based a lot of that story on memories that my mother had told me about growing up in the 1930s. And though it is fiction, it's not actually what happened to my mother. My mother's memories are like an echo throughout the story. So I was very close to the characters, and it just seemed like I needed to tell more of their story. They stayed alive for me, so sometimes it gets harder though, because you've got to stay fresh and you've got to come up with more events and more circumstances and more problems, conflicts for the characters.
How many books have you written now?
People always ask me how many I've written, and I tell them that's the wrong question. You need to ask me how many I've published.
Okay.
I think I've published 25. I think
25.
I've written quite a few more than that. Some of them are still on my shelf back home that haven't found a publisher yet.
I understand that.
But I have a couple more that'll be coming out in the next couple of years.
When was your first book published?
I published my first book in 1978. It was a historical romance published by Warner Books. And it was about the settling of Kentucky. I set my characters in the traveling church that came from Spotsylvania and settled in near Logan's Fort. And so that was my first historical novel.
Okay, and did you see yourself back then as writing, as being a romance writer, or?
I don't consider myself a romance
No, back
writer
then,
now.
70, okay.
More of a historical
Okay.
romance. I mean, that was what was popular at the time. But after that, I've also written like 11 young adult and middle reader books. So I think I just see myself as a writer, and whatever grabs my interest right now, that's what I want to be writing. And of course, I want to grab the reader's interest as well.
Well, haven't you written some inspiration type?
Well, the books that I have out recently are all inspirational fiction. They do have the faith journey of the characters in it, and they're published by inspirational book publisher, Revell Books, with this division of Baker Publishing Group.
Okay.
So they are considered inspirational fiction.
Okay, I mean, you are very well-rounded. I just wanted to bring that out, that you're more than just the Shaker writer. And I think you displayed that.
A lot of people like my Shaker books,
Right,
and
they're
they have
outstanding.
been popular with readers, but I do write other books as well.
Okay, you have a website,
I do.
and it's
AnnHGabhart.com.
Okay.
I also do a blog a couple of times a week. I do all that Facebook, and nowadays with books they expect you to be out there on the internet, so writers are very social media focused.
Well, I think you mentioned to me before we came on that you speak at schools and other functions.
I did a lot of speaking at schools when my young adult books were published, but now that I write more for adults, I don't get that call as much. But this morning I was speaking at one of my granddaughter's schools, and it's always fun to talk to kids because they have a million questions. You go in to talk to a bunch of adults and ask them if they have questions, and some of them, They just sort of sit there and don't want to ask anything. But boy, kids don't have that problem.
Well, and how many book fairs have you attended?
Oh, shoot, I don't know. I used to I attended some when I had my young adult books.
Uh-huh.
And then I went for several years in the 80s without publishing a book. And so then back in 2005, when my first inspirational book was published, I was back at the fair. And so I've been there every year since then, but I'm not sure how many of my young adult books I was there with.
Do you still enjoy
Oh, I love the
part?
book fair. The book fair is great. Everybody should come to the book fair because you get to meet so many different types of, if you don't like my book, you're going to like somebody's book
Right.
for sure, because there's all different kinds of books, and it's a great place to talk to the authors that maybe you have read before, and everybody's always really ready to talk to the readers.
Now, last week we had Jenny Smith on,
Oh, yeah.
and she mentioned that you and her are going to be speaking at a senior.
On the Friday before the book fair, we're going to be at a senior citizen center giving a speech, and that's all I know about it.
Okay.
Jenny may know more, but I haven't been contacted again except to say
So you
that
really
they're
just
planning
talk
to do
about
it.
your books and about writing
Right.
and just the history of it all.
Yeah, it'll be fun to talk to. Maybe I bet those senior citizens will be like those kids at school. I bet they'll have a million questions.
I'm sure they will. Well, listen, Ann, I appreciate you being on here today, and
Always fun. Always fun.
it'll be. I hope you have a great day at the book fair, and you usually have a pretty good day, don't you?
Most of the time I have a lot of people come by, and it's partly because I'm local. I live in Anderson County, not very far away. I have a lot of friends, and over the years you have a lot of return visitors. I'm sure the other authors have the same.
Only follow up. You've lived in Anderson County most of your life, haven't you? Or all
I
of it?
actually was born in Anderson County. I've always lived in Anderson County. I haven't traveled all over the world like this gentleman.
Oh, okay. All righty. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Our third guest is Gwenda Bond. Welcome.
Hi.
And your book is The Woken Gods, right?
That's
did I
right.
pronounce that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. What's this book about?
So this book is set in our world, in a transformed Washington, D.C., where 5 years earlier all the gods from ancient mythology awoke around the globe. And there are 7 tricksters who have embassies in D.C., and they deal with a secret society that's headquartered in the Library of Congress. And there's a teenage girl who gets drawn into intrigue when her dad steals a dangerous relic.
Okay. Now, this is a young
adult fantasy.
young adult fantasy?
Yes, urban fantasy.
Okay. Now, your first book came out last year, correct?
That's right. Blackwood was my first book and came out last year.
Now, what did that fall under?
It was also young adult fantasy. It was set in modern day and was a modern day lost colony, take on the lost colony of Roanoke.
Okay. Now, on your current book, how do you come up with?
If I could
Something like
answer that, I'm sure it would make my parents happy because it would answer a lot of questions they've had over the years. I don't know. I have a lot of interests, and I like to write about things, mashing up kind of historical or research topics into sort of the modern day is something that all my books, I think, have in common. And I've always loved mythology, and there are a lot of really interesting pantheons like the Sumerians and the Egyptians that we really don't see that much in fiction, not as much as the Greek gods, although there are some Greek gods in the book. So I kind of wanted to explore sort of a universe that used some of those mythologies that we don't see all the time.
Did this require a lot of research?
It did, although, because it was something I've been interested in, I've always tell people if you're stuck about what to write, because most writers, and I bet you too are no exception, gather books about different topics that interest them, not planning to write about them necessarily. So if people are stuck and don't know what to write about, I always tell people to look at your bookshelves and see what you've amassed a little mini library on, because that's probably something that you could get a book out of. So, I absolutely have tons of mythology books, tons of books about Washington, D.C., and so it just kind of all came together once I had the idea.
Okay. Now are you from Lexington, or?
I'm from Jackson County, actually,
Oh,
Eastern
Jackson
Kentucky.
County.
Yeah, but I do live in Lexington and have for a decade now.
Okay. Had you always aspired to be a novelist, or is it something that just kind of?
I was always a writer, and I always wanted to be a writer. I dabbled in screenplays for a few years, but books have always been my first love, and I really love Kentucky, and I had no desire to move out to the West Coast, so I decided to try my hand at young adult novels, which really felt like a fresh place to work in, and that was kind of when I found my voice for novel writing. I definitely have a few novels in the drawer before the first one that I sold.
I assume were you a big science fiction fan?
I was always a science fiction fantasy fan, but I read everything really. But I am married to a science fiction writer.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah, so I definitely have become a lot better versed in that part of the field than I probably was growing up. But I certainly loved Ray Bradbury and Edgar Allan Poe and all those famous genre writers when I was growing up. But I really read everything.
Influences. And yeah, it's is your husband? Is he a published author as well?
He is. He has written mostly short stories, and he does some work for hire fantasy novels. But he actually is he has way more accolades than I do for his short fiction. He's been up for most of the science fiction awards.
What's his name?
Christopher Rowe.
Christopher Rowe. Okay. Now, has he been an inspiration to you? I mean, has he helped you along the way?
He definitely helps me along the way, but I mean, he would just be way too full of himself if I said he was an inspiration. I'm his inspiration.
Okay.
No, we really do help each other a lot, but we write completely different types of work.
Now you have a book coming out next year, Girl on a Wire.
Girl on a Wire, yes.
Now, what's that about?
It's a modern circus story about two teenagers who are from circus dynasties who are rivals that basically have to solve a mystery together. As you can tell, I really think about building a brand when I decide what to write. No, I don't. It drives my agent crazy.
Really? So when is that going to come out?
It comes out next fall, actually. I just turned in the first big round of edits, so I don't quite have the release date, but it'll probably be September or October.
Okay. That's always a lot of fun too, isn't it?
It's been a lot of fun. This was my first time working with a new editor, and so it was interesting to have an experience to compare it to and work with somebody new that had sort of new ideas, and I love both my editors.
Okay, and Ann, you've worked